Hey guys, tonight we're heading deep into a candlelit monastery, where the air smells faintly of old parchment, beeswax, and bread baked 12 hours ago. You're wrapped in a coarse woolen robe, itchy in all the wrong places, and your knees ache slightly from sleeping on a straw mat layered directly over cold stone. Outside, it's not just dark, it's medieval dark. No street lamps, no glow from electronics, only starlight filtering through narrow iron-barred windows, and the occasional flicker from an oil lamp someone forgot to snuff. The bell rings, not a jingle, not a soft ding. A full-body gong that startles every bird in the rafters. You rub your eyes and realize it's time for vigils, the first of the day's many prayers. And yes, this happens before sunrise, sometimes around 2 or 3 in the morning, which means you've barely slept, and you're expected to chant loudly. In Latin, you probably won't survive this, so before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. I love seeing how far our sleepy little monastery reaches. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shuffle down a narrow corridor, following the other monks who move in near silence, feet whispering against ancient stones. They all look equally half-dead. 1 or 2 might still be dreaming. You pass under a carved lintella scene of saints and dragons, so worn it's practically an abstract painting nound into the church. Candles flicker. The air is cooler here, and the incense from last night's prayers still clings to the walls. It's hard to imagine choosing this life, but here you are, a postulant in a medieval monastery. You wanted spiritual clarity, quiet reflection, maybe a chance to grow some medicinal herbs and write things in beautiful handwriting. But nobody mentioned the sleep schedule, or lack thereof. The monks rise at this hour every single night, not once a week, not during special festivals, every night. The divine officiates separate prayer sessions, spaced throughout the day, and night begins here, long before sunrise, with vigils. Think of it like a spiritual pre-game ritual. The theory is noble. If you're waking regularly to pray, you're keeping your soul alert and humble. The reality, you're staring at an illuminated manuscript, wondering if anyone would notice if you just rested your forehead on the margin for a second. Historians still argue whether most monks actually stayed awake for the full length of these midnight devotions. Some suggest younger monks often dozed through them in the back rows, while older monks learned to pray while mostly unconscious. A few extreme orders, like the Carthusians, were known to sleep in their robes, sitting upright, which frankly just sounds like a medieval prank. You glance over and spot Brother Tomas, who's already nodded off with his mouth slightly open. He looks peaceful, until he starts softly reciting the wrong psalm in a half-dream state. Nobody says anything. Everyone's too tired, back in your cramped dormitory, which the monks call the dormitorium. Sleep is a strictly regulated affair. Beds are lined up side by side. No pillows, no blankets, just thin mattresses stuffed with straw, if you're lucky. You sleep in your habit, that's the robe, because undressing is considered both impractical and, weirdly, immodest. You're expected to rise at the first bell, which isn't exactly gentle. There's no snooze button, lest you count Brother Michael's snoring, which is somehow louder than the bell itself, and the kicker. You can't just collapse back into bed after vigils. Nope. Depending on the abbey, you might go straight into manual labor, study, or even more prayers. Some monks got lucky at certain abbeys. There was a short rest allowed between early morning vigils and the next service, Lauds, but this rest usually lasted about as long as a short daydream. Still, the body adapts, kind of, after a few weeks. You start waking up just before the bell rings. Almost like your soul's internal alarm is pre-programmed for suffering. You shuffle half asleep through rituals, half mumble the Latin chants, and somehow manage to survive on scattered fragments of sleep, like a monkish squirrel hoarding acorns of unconsciousness. And here's a weird tidbit. Monks believed that breaking up sleep wasn't bad, it was holy. In fact, many medieval people outside monasteries also practiced segmented sleep. The idea of sleeping 8 hours straight is a pretty modern invention. Monks were just leaning into what society already did, only with more chanting and fewer featherbeds. You catch yourself nodding off mid-prayer. You're not alone. One monk to your left actually starts to sway like a sleepy tree. Nobody calls him out. That would be prideful. Instead, you gently bump shoulders so he doesn't topple into the font. Eventually, the bells ring again. It's time for Lauds the Dawn prayer. You blink. The sky outside is beginning to lighten to a dusty blue. Birds stir in the eaves. The day, somehow, has only just begun, and you, bleary-eyed and blinking, shuffle back out of the chapel, already counting the minutes until your next stolen nap. Asterisk, you step back into the cloister as the sky glows. Pale Lots is over, and technically, the monastic day has begun, except your body's still unsure whether it's morning or just an extended night intermission. The air has a faint taint of wood smoke and wet stone. Somewhere nearby, someone rings a small handbell, summoning the monastery's cook to begin preparing porridge for the morning meal. You don't head there though, not yet. Instead, you shuffle toward the scriptorium, because, as a junior monk, you're low on the hierarchy and high on the list of available hands for tedious jobs. You half hope the ink pots haven't been filled yet. If not, you might get 10 whole minutes of stillness before anyone notices. But before we get into your day, you need to understand something very strange about this monastery. Time doesn't behave here the way it does elsewhere. And not because it's mystical or enchanted, though the echoing bells and flickering candles might make it feel that way. No, monastic time bends to the rhythm of devotion, not the tick of a mechanical clock. Because here's the truth. Medieval monks didn't really have clocks, or at least not in the way we think of them now. Mechanical timekeeping was still in its clumsy infancy, often inaccurate and prone to needing someone to poke it awake. In your abbey, the closest thing to a clock is Brother Hugh, who claims he can tell the time by the angle of sunlight on his favorite gargoyle. No one believes him, but somehow he's always early to dinner. Instead of minutes and hours, you live by the rule of St. Benedict's spiritual timetable written down centuries ago that organizes the day into 8 prayer services, each anchored 2 solar events: dawn, mid-morning, noon, mid-afternoon, sunset, evening, midnight, and one in the dead of night. Time is marked by church bells and instinct. No wristwatches, no chiming wall clocks, just a rhythm of bells and rituals that never really stops. So how do you keep from going completely mad? That's where your body's internal sense of time starts to get weird. You learn to count heartbeats while washing bowls. You measure the hour by how far the shadows crawl across the cloister walk. You develop an ear for subtle changes in the bell's echo. Was that a prayer bell or the work bell? Was it rung long or short? Sometimes the bell ringer gets distracted and tolls the wrong one, throwing the whole schedule off. When that happens, monks just sort of pause and reevaluate their entire existence. Now, you might think the monks would solve this with some kind of schedule written on the wall. A chart, maybe. A rotating wheel. Nope, that would be too easy. Many abbeys intentionally avoided written time charts because the goal wasn't efficiency, it was humility. You were supposed to surrender to the monastery's rhythm like a boat surrendering to the tide. Or, to be honest, like a sleep-deprived intern surrendering to whatever the senior monks said was happening next. Of course, there were more advanced abbeys. Some had water clocks, clever little contraptions where drips or floaters indicated the passage of time. Others used candle clocks. You'd light a candle marked with lines, and as it melted down past the markings, time passed. Problem. Drafty monasteries weren't ideal for predictable melting. One gust of wind and suddenly Vespers was happening 2 hours early and the soup hadn't even boiled yet. There were even some sundials, but again clouds, rain, winter, darkness, none of these made ideal conditions. Timekeeping, in practice, became a blend of spiritual discipline and educated guessing. Brother Alan, the oldest monk in your wing, claims he can tell time by listening to his stomach. He's surprisingly accurate, though occasionally confuses terse with indigestion. Now, remember, you're doing this every single day. The same rhythm, the same bells, the same chanted psalms, the same cloister path with the same worn stones. Underfoot, the repetition is comforting. Until it isn't. There's a strange psychological effect that kicks in a kind of timeless trance. You start to dream during prayers, not metaphorically actually dream. Your body's standing, your mouth is chanting, but your brain is off in a meadow chasing sheep that recite verses from Job. This is when the monks start developing adaptations. Nothing official, just quiet, shared wisdom passed monk to monk. How to rest your eyes without closing them. How to shift your weight so your knees don't buckle. How to hum in rhythm while breathing in such a way that it sounds like you're reciting the right line even when you're lost in the wrong one. Historians still debate whether these sleep while standing techniques were unique to monastic life or part of a broader medieval survival tactic. Some scholars argue that monks had enhanced ability to slip in and out of micronaps during long prayers, something modern sleep. Scientists call polyphasic sleep where short bursts of sleep substitute for longer stretches. Others say that's nonsense and the monks were just exhausted and making it up as they went. You wouldn't be surprised either way. All you know is, last night, you dreamed you were back in the dormitory, waking up for vigils. While you were already at vigils, eventually, the sun climbs high enough to bathe the cloister in gold. You pause at the fountain in the middle, icy water dripping into the stone basin, echoing gently against the sandstone walls. It's one of the few peaceful moments in the day. No bells, no psalms, just a soft wind, the scent of rosemary, and the brief, blessed silence between prayers. You sit on a bench, just for a second. The stone is warm from the sun. You close your eyes, not sleeping, just meditating. At least, that's what you'll tell Brother Prior if he catches you, and there it is again. That little stretch of borrowed time. No chance, no duties, just stillness. It won't last long, but for now, it's enough. Asterisk, back on your feet. The bell rings again, this time for terce, the third prayer of the day, despite it not feeling like the third anything. You join the procession of monks heading into the chapel once more, robes rustling faintly. the occasional cough or foot shuffle breaking the morning hush. Your limbs feel heavy, like someone swapped your bones for wet wool. You can't quite remember if you already did this prayer or are about to do it. The lines blur, but that's the thing, this is by design. The relentless rhythm, the repeated chants, the blurred boundaries between waking and sleeping, it all pulls you deeper into a dreamlike state that's supposed to help you commune with the divine. You start chanting again, same psalms, same pacing, but your brain is not fully online. It's floating somewhere between meaning and melody, which is exactly where many monks spend half their lives. This may sound like sleep deprivation, but in monastic terms, it's called contemplation. Apparently, if you're too tired to remember your own name, you're finally quiet enough to hear God whisper. Still, your body has limits. That's where things start to get interesting. You're not the only one with a foggy brain and trembling knees. Around you, a whole room full of monks is experiencing the same thing. And over the centuries, they developed tactics, little tricks. That's how you discover one of the monastery's worst-kept secrets, the unofficial nap zones. Let's start with the cloister walks. These are long, stone corridors that loop around the central garden courtyard. Monks often pace here after meals, reciting psalms, or meditating, or at least, that's the official line. But if you watch carefully, you'll see certain spots are oddly popular. A particular bench in the north corner, a shady niche near the herb garden wall, the spot behind the laundry where the sun hits just right mid-morning. These are the places monks go to reflect. Or, in more honest terms, snooze with their eyes open. You try it yourself. After terce, you slip into the cloister and walk slowly, hands folded, head bowed. Classic meditative posture. Nobody questions it. You lean slightly against the cool wall, just for a moment. The sun warms your hood. Your knees relax. You exhale through your nose in a long, slow breath. Boom. 5-minute nap. Not deep sleep. Not enough to dream, but just long enough to reset the fog. You're not alone in this. Every monastery had its own favored nap spots, usually known only to initiates. Some monks even marked them discreetly, scratches on stone, thumb-worn patches on wooden rails, little carvings in the cloister's mortar that resembled saints but secretly meant good place to hide when exhausted. One monk, Brother Elias, shows you a particularly clever trick. He walks slowly while muttering Latin in rhythm with his footsteps, then closes his eyes mid-step. He sleepwalks his prayers, making slow, looping circuits of the cloister walk, all while unconscious. The catch: he's memorized the exact number of steps between pillars. If he reaches the third without waking up, he turns. It's like spiritual Roomba navigation. Historians still argue whether these micro-naps were encouraged or merely tolerated. Some abbots pretended not to notice. Others installed wake monks, literally monks whose job was to walk around nudging drowsy brethren back to verticality. At least one 13th century chronicle mentions a monk who poked sleepers with a long stick, though scholars debate whether this was actual history or just monastic gossip, of course. Not every monk mastered the art of sneaky naps. You've heard horror stories of brothers who dozed off while kneeling, collapsed face first into the choir stalls, and had to explain the nosebleed as a vision. Then there's Brother Justice, who once leaned too hard against a cloister column and startled a nesting pigeon. The flurry of feathers and flailing arms was enough to send the abbot into a 5-minute sermon about spiritual vigilance. But despite the danger, the practice of cloister napping persisted. Why? because it was the only loophole. Officially, monks were supposed to remain awake and alert for prayer. But practically, even the most devout realized the human body had limits, and when you're up before sunrise and singing well past sunset, those limits arrive quickly. One fringe theory, proposed by a modern sleep historian with too much time on his hands, suggests monks developed a second internal clock and ability to phase in and out of alertness in rhythm with bells, like trained birds responding to chimes. It's unproven, but not implausible. You've started to feel it yourself. That odd moment when the bell rings and, despite bone-deep exhaustion, your body snaps upright like a puppet on a string. Of course, you still crave a real nap. Not a 5-minute lean, a full, glorious, horizontal, drooling on your robes snooze. But those are harder to come by, so you make do. You develop what monks call sacred idleness, the art of appearing holy while catching quick rest. You time your chants to your breathing. You sway ever so slightly on your feet, allowing your body weight to shift and trick your muscles into resting. You learn how to blink slow enough that it feels like your eyes are closed. And perhaps most sacred of all, you begin to cherish those in-between moments. The time after terce, before the work bell, the silence during a thunderstorm, when everyone huddles indoors, the pause between psalms when the air hums with candlelight and forgotten breath. It's not perfect, but for a weary monk in a timeless world, these snatches of stillness are everything. Asterisk after the morning flurry of prayers and sneaky cloister naps, you'd think there might be a break, perhaps a short stroll through the herb garden, or time to copy a page or two in the scriptorium while sipping warm beer. Nope, instead, it's time for the assigned labor of the day. And unless you're lucky enough to have been given an indoor job like polishing chalices or sorting dried lentils, you'll be outside, sleeves rolled up, mucking about in the monastery's pig pen, or hauling buckets of cabbage water to the compost pile. You trudge past the laundry shed, where two monks are arguing in whispers about whether it's sinful to nap while turning the drying rack. You don't catch the conclusion, but one of them starts nodding off mid-sentence, which seems like a pretty strong counterpoint. Your assignment today, gardening, not the nice kind, with roses and lavender. You've been handed a crooked wooden rake and sent to the root vegetable patch to lighten the soil. It's not glamorous. It's not even particularly spiritual, but it's part of the rule manual. Labor is seen as a form of prayer, a way to keep the body humbled while the soul ascends, or at least tries to. And here's the secret you learn while raking dirt for the 10th time. Monks found ways to blend their prayer and their exhaustion into one blurry state of semi-conscious holiness. That's how you discover the next great sleep trick: rhythmic labor naps. Imagine this: you're hunched over, raking in long, slow strokes, back and forth. The rake catches the dry earth, scrapes through clumps, and pulls up the faint aroma of beets. You start mumbling psalms under your breath, not because anyone's listening, but because it keeps your mouth busy. The sun is warm on your back. The breeze brushes your hood. The rhythm settles in. Rake, breathe, and suddenly your brain detaches. Not asleep, not exactly, but not fully present either. It's like your soul wanders a bit while your hands keep moving. You could swear you dreamt about Saint Jerome riding a donkey made of bread, but the row is finished. The work is done. Somehow, your body just did it? Historians still argue whether this state, known in some modern psychology circles as repetitive motion trance, was deliberately cultivated by monastic life or simply a byproduct of its monotony. Some believe monks, particularly those in hard labor orders like the Cistercians, use tasks like ploughing, milling, or baking as forms of meditation, not unlike what Buddhist monks do with sand gardens. Others think it was just the best way to stay sane. You meet Brother Ambrose, the monastery's most veteran gardener. He claims he once slept through an entire morning of weeding and woke up with calluses he didn't remember earning. You laugh, but he just shrugs and points to the sky. God guides the hand when the heart is willing. Sure, Brother Ambrose, but it also helps that you can hoe a row in your sleep. Later, you're assigned to help scrub the stone steps outside the chapel. Another perfect nap zone, it turns out. The gentle brushing motion, the faint rhythm of soapy water sloshing, the drowsy warmth of the sun on your shoulders, it's all very hypnotic. But beware, not all labor naps are created equal. One novice monk tried to sneak a quick sit-down while shelling peas, only to be found asleep with his head in the basket, drooling onto perfectly good legumes. The cook was furious, the peas were ruined, and the monk had to fast an extra day, which honestly just made him more tired. The rule of Saint Benedict does actually mention rest, sort of. The midday period between sext and none, usually around noon, was sometimes treated as a break, especially in warmer climates. Some abbeys allowed monks to lie down, particularly during summer months. This rest period, known in some texts as a repositorium, wasn't universally observed, but where it was, it became sacred. Quiet, calm, not quite sanctioned. Napping, but not your monastery. Here, rest is only for the dead, and the diurnal for Brother Prior, who seems to vanish into his quarters right after lunch and emerges mysteriously refreshed. That's where the cloister ladder comes in. It's not a ladder, it's a metaphorical ranking of activities. At the top, contemplation. Below that, prayer. Then study, then labor, then dead last sleep. Sleep isn't evil, but it's considered the weakest of the bodily needs, something to be overcome, not indulged, which is why monks start learning to pretend they aren't tired even when they're collapsing. You learn to fake enthusiasm. You nod earnestly during sermons while secretly resting your eyes. You volunteer to carry firewood because the woodpile is quiet and no one watches you there. You even once offered to repair the goose pen just because it had a shady corner where the geese rarely went. There's one dangerous moment near the end of the work period, right before none, when the sun is high and the silence is thick and the temptation to lie flat on the grass is overwhelming. You give in, just for a second. You sit by the wall, close your eyes, feel the earth tilt ever so gently under you. The sound of wind in the apple trees blurs into a soft hum, then clang. The bell rings again. You jolt upright, heart hammering, grass stuck to your sleeve. You scramble to your feet, brush off your robe, and pretend you were just meditating. On Ecclesiastes, the other monks don't say anything. One of them even gives you the faintest smile, as if to say, same. Because here's the truth. In this world of endless bells and whispered prayers, even the tiniest nap is a small act of rebellion. And maybe, just maybe, a tiny taste of grace. Asterisk, the bell for nun rings 9th hour. Mid-afternoon prayers, and once again, you're off to the chapel. You've spent the last hour raking soil, scrubbing stone, dodging goose-related duties, and, let's be honest, attempting to nap without anyone noticing. But as you kneel again in your assigned spot, the same dull chant in the same dim chapel, something inside you starts to rebel. Your body has had enough. This, it turns out, is when monks discovered another time-tested trick, the midnight meal hack. A tradition not officially written in most monastic rules, but alive and well in whispered practice, because even the holiest among us get hungry and sleepy at the wrong times. You're starving. Breakfast, a single scoop of barley porridge, and a sliver of cheese was hours ago. Lunch was humble and mostly brown, and there's still a long while before the evening meal. But back in the kitchen annex, a quiet arrangement has long been in place. If you're clever and you know who to ask, you can sneak a bit of leftover beer bread or soft cheese in the mid-afternoon or late at night. Nothing dramatic, just enough to take the edge off and keep your eyes open through the final prayers. This quiet snack habit is more widespread than anyone admits. Historians even found marginal notes in some medieval cookbooks: bread to keep the brothers alert at vigils, or for strength after matins when the head nods low. One abbey in northern France reportedly kept a jar of honeyed barley in the sacristy, possibly for communion, but more likely to help drowsy monks recover after chanting through the Psalms. You first hear of it from Brother Rafe, who's not the most spiritual monk, but certainly one of the most practical. He teaches you how to duck into the refectory between none and vespers, when most monks are off doing their final tasks. There's a particular cupboard lower shelf, left side, that always seems to have a crust of dark rye and half a cup of weak ale. You're told it's there for emergencies. Apparently, emergency is broadly interpreted, and the funny thing, no one really gets in trouble for it. Everyone pretends they don't see it, because everyone does it, including, you suspect, Brother Prior, who mysteriously never yawns during Complan, despite being over 70 and apparently subsisting on nothing but boiled turnips and spiritual fulfillment. The monastic diet plays a role in all of this. Heavy on grains, vegetables, and beer, with little meat and minimal sugar, it wasn't exactly energy-packed. Most monasteries followed a seasonal rhythm, with lighter food in the summer and heavier fare in the winter. But regardless of the time of year, it was hard to stay awake on a stomach full of lentils and cabbage. Combine that with 2 hours of chanting and a 3 a.m. wake-up call, and you begin to understand why a secret slice of barley loaf at 4 p.m. might save your life. Of course, you're not supposed to be hungry. The rule of St. Benedict states clearly that monks should be satisfied with 2 simple meals a day, eaten in silence, consumed gratefully. The rule is optimistic. In practice, monks developed a range of ways to cope with their stomachs and their sleepiness. That included turning meals into mini rests. Picture this: you're in the refectory, seated on a hard bench, bowl of bland stew in front of you. The meal is eaten in silence, with one monk reading scripture aloud from a raised pulpit. The passages are long, the voice is monotone, the stew is lukewarm. Halfway through the reading, your spoon slips from your hand. You stare into the bowl, and for a moment you drift, not fully asleep, but definitely not awake. And this becomes your secret third nap of the day. Eyes half-lidded, mouth still chewing, one ear tuned to Leviticus, the other tuned to your own snoring stomach. If you sit near the end of the table, no one notices. Or at least, no one says anything. Maybe they're asleep too. Historians still debate the extent of midnight or midday snacking among monastic communities. Some claim these moments of indulgence were rare, limited to older monks or those in ill health. Others suggest that most abbeys maintained a quiet understanding. Rules are written for the ideal monk, not the real monk, and that's what you're learning. The rule may govern the body, but it doesn't always govern the belly or the need. To steal 5 minutes of sleep with your cheek resting against the cool stone wall. Later, you pass the scriptorium and spot Brother Marcus face down on a wooden table. Quill still in hand, the ink bottle dangerously close to his elbow. You consider waking him, but stop. You've been there. He probably just needed a moment. You quietly close the door and let him be. The sun dips lower. Shadows stretch across the cloister walk. You spot a novice monk curled up on a bench, with a book draped dramatically across his chest, like a blanket. He's not fooling anyone, and yet there's no scolding, no rebuke, just the quiet acknowledgement, monk to monk, that this life is hard, sacred, yes, peaceful, often, but tiring beyond reason, and every trick, every hack, every secret snack or sideways doze, that's just part of survival. You're learning. The rhythms now, not just the bells and psalms, but the invisible beats in between, the ones where real life, real fatigue, and real humanity sneak in. Back in the chapel for Vespers, the golden hour prayer that welcomes in the evening, you kneel with the others, shoulders slouched just a little more than usual. The sun is low now, bleeding amber light through the narrow windows and casting long shadows that stretch across the cold stone floor like sleepy fingers. This is the time when tiredness becomes its own kind of silence. The chants are slower, deeper, as if each voice is sinking into the rhythm instead of riding on top of it. You manage to follow the Latin for the first psalm. By the third, your mind is drifting again, swept somewhere between memory and music, and that's when it happens. Your head droops, just once. Just long enough that you feel your chin touch your chest and instantly snap it back up. You look around, hoping no one noticed. Too late. Brother Oswald's watching. He raises an eyebrow. A tiny smile flickers at the corner of his mouth. You've been caught, which brings you to one of the monastery's strangest truths. Napping can be heresy if you do it at the wrong time, officially. Falling asleep during a sacred office's vigils or matins is considered a breach of discipline. You're meant to be alert in the presence of the divine body and soul, upright before God. Dozing off mid-prayer. That's sloth, one of the 7 deadlies. The sin of laziness. Worse, it suggests your spirit isn't properly trained. So yes, technically, your 5-second head dip just endangered your soul, at least in theory. But in practice, things are murkier. You see, monks weren't robots, and abbots weren't blind. Everyone knew that when you're waking before dawn, fasting through most of the day, working your hands raw in the fields, and standing for hours chanting psalms in a cold church, sometimes you'll blink too long, you'll sway, you'll lean against the choir stall just a little too hard. What happens next depends on your abbot. Some were merciful, some were not. At your monastery, falling asleep during a major office gets you hay duty. It's not official penance, exactly, but it might as well be. You're sent to the stables to clean out soiled straw, usually with a bent rake and a bucket that leaks. You spend your next 2 afternoons ankle-deep in hay that smells less like summer fields and more like goat-related regrets. You serve your time without complaint, mostly because you're too tired to protest. Historians still argue whether these sleep penalties were meant as correction or just public reminders to try harder. Some orders took things even further. 14th century rule from a particularly zealous priory in Burgundy states that a monk caught sleeping during matins must kneel barefoot for the entire next night's service. Another mentions enforced Silence for 48 hours, though one can only imagine the sleep. This punishment might accidentally allow the tension between sacred discipline and human. Weakness shows up everywhere in monastic writings. Some texts warn sternly against the devil of drowsiness, while others describe it more gently as the cloaked thief of time. You can't help but feel a little poetic sympathy for this so-called devil. If he's robbing you of anything, it's just the chance to curl up on a warm patch of floor and forget, for a few minutes, that you've been vertical since before sunrise. Still, the fear of public embarrassment keeps most monks sharp, at least outwardly. You learn new tricks. You whisper Latin softly to keep your mouth moving. You clench your toes in your sandals to stay upright. You chew fennel seeds, passed quietly from the kitchen monk, not for flavor, but for the sting of bitterness that keeps your brain alert. But once, just once, you let your eyes drift too long. You're standing, hands folded, the choir master's voice droning on. The warmth of the candle beside you flickers in rhythm with your breath. The world slows, and you dream it's a strange dream. You're in the chapel, yes, but it's empty. There's no one chanting, no bell ringing, just silence. You walk slowly across the stone floor, feeling it ripple like water beneath your feet. You sit in the abbot's chair and stare at the crucifix. But instead of Christ, it's your own face looking back. And then, just as you reach out to touch it, someone coughs. Your eyes fly open. You're still in the real chapel, still in line. The chant is halfway through the Magnificat. No one seems to have noticed, or if they did, they're not saying anything. But your heart beats thudding a bit faster, and your palms feel like you just ran up the cloister steps. You survive Vespers, barely, afterward. The monks file out in quiet lines, heads bowed, lips still murmuring echoes of prayer. You follow, behind Brother Oswald, who leans toward you as you exit and whispers, "Welcome to the club." You smile, in spite of yourself. So it's not just you. Later, in the scriptorium, you find a small volume hand-copied, not illuminated, titled On the Temptations of the Mind at Prayer. Flipping through, you find a passage underlined faintly in red. Even the most faithful servant may find his thoughts adrift as the soul tires. The body must be trained, the mind forgiven. You think about copying it onto your wall. Asterisk, the final. Light of the day is fading as you step back into the cloister. A cool hush falls over the monastery like a heavy woolen blanket. The bell for collation rings soon, a light evening meal. More ceremony than sustenance, and, finally, the day's last prayer. Compline, you're tired. Not just I could use a nap, tired. This is the kind of fatigue that lives in your bones. A whole body quiet that dulls your senses and makes even the bird song feel distant. You've learned by now that this is the most dangerous time, the false finish line. Because once compline is over, you assume you're done for the day. But the monks have one more trick up their frayed. Wax-stained sleeves, the secret midnight prayer group. It's not official. It's not listed on any schedule. But if you keep your eyes open after complingus a little, you'll notice that a handful of monks stay behind in the chapel. They kneel, they light fresh candles, and they begin to chant again, this time in near whispers. You ask Brother Rafe about it. He smirks. "Oh, that," he says, "that's for the insmyex, the ones God forgot to knock out." You're not sure if he's joking, because here's the thing, some monks genuinely can't sleep, not because they're anxious or restless, but because their bodies have forgotten how. After decades of segmented sleep, their internal clocks are so warped that lying still in a dark dormitory just feels unnatural, so they return to the chapel. Not out of duty, out of habit. It's oddly comforting. The idea that, while most of the abbey sleeps, a few are still awake, whispering prayers into the shadows. The monastery breathes in shifts. While you rest, someone else keeps the rhythm alive. Still, you're not part of that group. Not yet, for now. Your goal is simple: survive Compline and make it back to your straw mattress before your legs collapse beneath you. Compline is gentler than the other offices. Fewer chants, softer lighting, even a psalm about rest. In peace I will lie down and sleep. For you alone, O Lord, make me dwell in safety. You like that one? It feels honest. Like even monks get scared of the dark. You kneel, you chant. You try not to wobble, and then it comes. The blessing. The abbot raises his hand. He murmurs something in Latin about protection through the night. You bow your head, your shoulders sag. It's over. The walk back to the dormitorium is slow and silent. Feet shuffle over stone. Doors creak softly. Candles flicker out one by one as monks slip into their cells or lie side by side in the shared sleeping hall. And this is where another secret emerges. The pillow workaround. You're not supposed to have one. Pillows are considered indulgent softness, is a gateway to sin, or at least to oversleeping. But monks are clever. Over time, small items begin to coincidentally appear beneath heads. Folded tunics, extra robes, sacks filled with dried lavender or grain. One monk uses a spare copy of the Psalms, which feels like a theological loophole. Another has arranged his sleeping mat to slope ever so slightly, creating the illusion of a pillow without actually admitting to it. You try the folded robe trick. It's not comfortable, but it's better than nothing. You lie down, eyes wide, in the dark, listening to the quiet chorus of snores, wheezes, and one monk who always hums faintly in his sleep like a distant kettle. This is supposed to be your long sleep, your restorative sleep. But here's the twist. It doesn't last. Around midnight, the bell rings again. Vigils you'd almost forgotten. Your body jolts up before your brain even registers the sound. You sit, dazed, half blind in the dark, fingers fumbling with your belt cord as if your hands are moving on their own. This is what monks call the sacred interruption. The idea is beautiful in theory. You break your sleep intentionally to wake the soul, to remind yourself that life is not comfort, and that devotion sometimes means standing barefoot in a cold chapel when you'd rather be dreaming about roasted chestnuts. Historians still debate whether this practice midnight prayers followed by a second sleep was spiritual genius or medieval masochism. Some say it allowed monks to enter a different kind of rest afterward, one that was deeper, more lucid. Others argue it was just a glorified sleep deprivation program that turned everyone into spiritual zombies. You can see both sides, because once you're kneeling in that dark chapel again, the candles barely lighting the carved stone, something strange happens. Your mind slows down, time unravels. The chants echo differently at night, quieter, closer to breath than music. You're not fully awake, but you're not dreaming either. You're just suspended, hovering somewhere in between. Maybe that's the point. Maybe sleep, for a monk, is not about rest, but about rhythm, about surrendering to something larger, about learning to live in the in-between. You chant until your voice gives out. Then, at last, the bell rings once more and, this time, it truly means sleep. Asterisk back in your straw-filled cot. This time, for real, you exhale, long and low, as if you're releasing the entire day from your lungs. The stone walls no longer feel cold. They've taken on the day's warmth. The single candle left burning near the doorway throws just enough golden flicker to see your own hands. They tremble faintly. You've done nothing extraordinary today, just prayed, worked, chanted, dozed, but it feels like you've climbed a mountain with your eyelids. This is when it hits you. You're getting better at this, not just the waking and chanting and moving in sleepy rhythm with bells, but at noticing the secret spaces in between. Because monastic life, you now realize, isn't made of the big, loud spiritual moments. It's built from the margins, from what monks call the quiet between the prayers. You settle deeper into your mat. It rustles with a whisper, straw shifting under your weight like a parchment turning in the wind. A distant bell tower creaks, but no sound comes. You've earned a few hours now, maybe 5 if no one sneezes too loudly or rolls over and dislodges a pewter cup again. But what surprises you most? You don't crave more sleep anymore. You crave better sleep. Deeper, holier, maybe. You've begun to understand why monks developed such strange, layered nap rituals, not just for survival, but as a sort of devotion. Rest, in this world, is something you have to learn. It's not given, it's not assumed. It's a discipline. Take Brother Alred, for example. No one's entirely sure how old he is. Some say 60, others say he was born during a lunar eclipse and raised by What matters is, he never seems tired. Not really. He dozes upright, often mid-conversation. He disappears at odd hours, then reappears with a smile and a perfectly memorized psalm. People whisper that he's mastered the 7th posture, a mythical sleeping method that allows a monk to nap sitting straight without anyone noticing. Supposedly taught only to the most disciplined after 20 years of silent lunches. You've caught glimpses of it read, kneeling, not swaying, eyes half closed, lips moving just enough to pass as prayer. But he's gone inside, clearly. He's on another plane. Meanwhile, you're doing your best just not to drool during Psalm 132. The thing is, monks had to be clever because they weren't allowed to rest on command. Rest had to fit inside the rigid bones of the rule, and so they created ritualized slowness. It's not a joke, it's not laziness, it's deliberate. The way monks walk through the cloister, slow, rhythmic, almost floating. The way they turn a page with a pause, a breath, a quiet moment of reverence. Every action becomes a potential place to slow down, to rest the eyes, to let the heart rate drop. It's the closest thing to sleep you can get while still being upright and technically active. You try it the next day. While washing the stone cups, you move in slow motion. Dip, scrub, rinse, breathe. Each gesture is drawn out like a lullaby in motion. And oddly enough, your brain starts to cool. The world gets quieter. You find yourself resting while moving. It's weird, but not unpleasant. Some monks say this is how you train your body to hide sleep. In plain sight, historians still puzzle over how monasteries functioned without collapsing under the weight of their own exhaustion. Some argue that communal life distributed the burden. When one monk flagged, another picked up the slack. Others believe the strange monastic sleep patterns, 2-part nights, midday micronaps, rhythmic tasks essentially restructured the circadian rhythm. Modern sleep scientists even have a term for it now: polyphasic sleep, a sleep schedule that breaks the standard 80-hour block into multiple shorter rests spaced throughout the day and night. It's efficient, in theory. And monks, whether knowingly or not, were early adopters. But science aside, here's what you feel: rest is sacred, even when it's stolen. You remember Brother Oswald telling you that the best sleep he ever had was during a thunderstorm. The dormitory rattled with the sound of rain on slate and wind howling through the arches. And for once, no one got up for matins. The abbot decided mercifully that nature's bells were louder than his own dots, so the monks stayed in their cots, wrapped in wool, dreaming of saints with umbrellas. Oswald said it was the only time he remembered what it felt like to be completely asleep now, lying here. Your body curled under a blanket that smells faintly of beeswax and old grain. You wonder if tonight might be like that. Maybe the midnight bell will forget to ring. Maybe Brother Hugh, our unofficial human clock, will sleep through the moonlight. Maybe you'll drift through the whole night like a floating psalm, undisturbed, unlikely, but for now, you close your eyes. Listen to the soft chorus of exhalations and straw shifting, and join the ancient tradition of monks everywhere, napping like it's a sacred art form. Asterisk, it's somewhere between dreams and dawn when the next bell calls you back, not the harsh clang of midday. This one is softer, rounder, like a deep yawn turned into metal. It's time for Lauds, the early morning praise. The sky outside the chapel is still dark, with only a whisper of indigo at the edges. You rise like bread, slowly, reluctantly, but with some inner warmth carrying you upward. Every bone creaks. Your belt is twisted. Your hood is inside. None of it matters. At this hour, the rules of dignity are suspended. Even the holiest monk stumbles once or twice on the way to the choir stalls. By now, you've stopped trying to wake up. It's not part of the process. You learn instead to function within the fog. This is the moment when monks rely most on instinct, on sheer muscle memory, and on the soothing power of familiarity. The same chant, the same step, the same bench that creaks slightly when you kneel. Even that becomes part of the routine. But Lauds is also when something rare and beautiful happens. Dreams leak in. You've heard of this from older monks, how their minds start blending the psalms with whatever visions they were having just before the bell rang. You're not sure if it's mystical or just exhaustion, but either way, it's vivid. Today, you half hear the words of Psalm 148, while seeing golden geese floating above a river made of warm honey. One of them had the face of the abbot. You try not to think about what that means. Dream sleep overlap is not new to monks. In fact, several medieval texts discuss it, albeit carefully. One 12th century monastic manual calls it the veil between spirit and sleep. Another, more suspicious, warns of false visions cloaked in sanctity. Yet another, from a Welsh priory, simply says, if the dream improves your chanting, it may be from God. And honestly, your chanting this morning is ... not bad. You stumble less. You even remember the Latin word for firmament, without looking at the cheat sheet carved into the back of the pew. You glance at Brother Marcus, who seems to be swaying gently in time with the melody. His eyes are closed. His mouth moves, but no sound comes out. Is he praying, sleeping, both? That's the trick. By now, the monks have mastered dual states of being. It's hard to explain to outsiders. You're standing, but you're also resting. You're singing, but your thoughts are adrift. You're technically awake, yet hovering, right above a nap like a bird over still water. Some monks even claim they choose to dream while chanting, that their minds slip back into whatever dream they were having before Lauds. picking it up like a half-freed book. It sounds absurd until you find yourself doing it too. This morning, you resume your dream from earlier. The honey river, the golden geese, the warm feeling of floating while your lips murmur sacred words. Historians still argue whether this phenomenon counts as meditation, sleep, or spiritual vision. One theory suggests that the structured monotony of monastic life induces a lucid twilight state, the same state artists and prophets supposedly used to access creativity or revelation. Another theory, more skeptical, chalks it up to mild sleep, deprivation, and shared hallucination. You're not here to decide. You're just here to survive another hour without tipping over. After odds, you shuffle back to the dormitory for what's known among the monks as the Holy Collapse. That brief, golden window before breakfast where everyone silently agrees to squeeze in another nap, officially unsanctioned, unofficially sacred. You don't even change out of your robes. You just collapse face first onto your straw mat, one sandal halfway off, one arm draped dramatically across your eyes like a swooning saint, and you sleep hard. This nap is different. It's not anxious or sneaky or guilty. It's earned. You've done the chanting, the waking, the praising. The monastery pauses for just long enough to breathe, and in that breath you fall. Outside, the sun creeps over the horizon, painting the cloister walk with gold. But inside, in the quiet dark of the dormitory, it might as well still be night. You wake 45 minutes later, mouth dry, robe twisted, but soul just a little lighter. Something about this cycled, this endless tide of prayer and rest, and waking again has started to shape you. You're not just learning how to live with sleep deprivation. You're learning how to rest with purpose, not the kind of rest that sprawls out and forgets the world, but the kind that folds itself into corners, the kind that knows its place, the kind that kneels and breathes and accepts the bell's next summons, not because it's easy, but because the rhythm is what makes the rest mean something. And just like that, the next bell rings. You rise again. The bell calls you once more, this time for prime. The first hour of daylight prayers, though it feels like the 8th time you've been summoned since the sun went down. By now, your body doesn't even argue. It just moves. You're upright before you're even conscious of it, like a wind-up toy that hears its melody and starts walking. And as you make your way through the cloister corridor, passing other monks in various states of robe-wrinkled dishevelment, you begin to notice something. Not all of them are tired. Some of them look ... fine, composed, even alert. That's when you learn about the monastery's most quietly envied group, the short-sleep monks. Not many. Maybe 3 or 4 out of the whole cloister. But they exist. Somehow, some way, they function on 4 hours of broken sleep and still manage to chant on pitch, carry water buckets without sloshing, and even correct your Latin declensions before breakfast. They're not smug about it, but they don't have to be. Their mere existence is enough to make you question every yawn you've ever yawned. Brother Joachim is one of them. Tall, silent, perpetually unbothered. He sleeps upright, back against the dormitory wall, arms folded like a crow perched on a windowsill. You've never seen him lie flat. No one has. Some think he meditates all night. Others suspect he sneaks naps between bell rings. A few whisper he's made of walnut wood and doesn't need sleep at all. Historians still debate whether monastic records exaggerated the sleeping habits of certain monks. Some documents boast of saints who did not rest for 40 nights, or who stood in vigil while others slumbered. Most modern scholars agree these were probably metaphors or generous estimates. After all, chronic sleep deprivation causes hallucinations, memory lapses, and, eventually, collapse. Even the holiest brain needs a nap, but short-sleep monks, they seem real enough. And they raise a difficult question. Are you weak for needing more sleep? Or are they just mutants? Brother Oswald comforts you with a gentle shrug. God gives each monk his rhythm, he says. Some just happen to get the tempo of a marching drum. You, meanwhile, feel more like a bassoon in a swamp. But all is not lost. Because next, you're introduced to one of monasticism's greatest equalizers, the miracle of warm water. It doesn't sound like much, but when you're half frozen from pre-dawn prayers and your fingers feel like cold rope, a basin of warm water before breakfast is nothing short of holy. You're assigned kitchen duty that morning, and while scrubbing porridge pots, you keep your hands submerged longer than necessary, purely for spiritual reasons. Of course, and then you realize something curious. Warmth wakes you up better than chanting. That's when you start noticing all the little ways monks sneak in heat, not just for comfort, but for alertness. There's Brother Hugh, who always volunteers to stoke the oven and mysteriously never yawns during terce. Or Sister Beatrix from the visiting convent, who carries a tiny clay flask of hot herb tea in her sleeve. It's technically a for her lungs. Over time, monks developed whole micro-rituals of warmth, slipping warm pebbles into sleeves, standing in sunbeams longer than strictly necessary, even heating stones by the fire and placing them at the foot of the bed. Practice so beloved that some abbeys had official stone warmers. You discover your own version, wrapping your arms around a soup kettle before it's cleaned. It's the most alive you've felt in a week, and the monastery accepts it, because everyone understands the unspoken truth. When sleep is scarce, warmth becomes rest. It's not just physical, it's psychological. A warm hand, a warm bowl, a warm patch of sun oil become substitute lullabies for people who no longer get lullabies. It's the nap you can have while standing. Monastic records even hint at this. One 10th century abbot wrote, "When the soul is wearied, let it sit by the fire. The spirit shall rise with the smoke." Another scribe, clearly exhausted, scrawled into a margin, "A warm bench is worth 6 psalms." By the time breakfast arrives, brown bread, soft cheese, boiled greens, you're strangely refreshed, not because you slept longer, but because you've learned to stretch the scraps of comfort like dough. Warm water, quiet chanting, that brief nap with one sandal still on. You sit next to Brother Marcus, who's awake for once. He tears his bread in half, hands you the larger piece, and says, "Today feels less heavy." You nod. It does. Not because the bells stopped, not because the schedule lightened, but because your body strangely has stopped fighting it. And when you stop resisting sleep, it becomes easier to carry. Like a heavy robe that settles on your shoulders instead of dragging at your feet. You chew slowly, you breathe deeply, and for the first time since you entered the monastery, you feel like maybe, just maybe, you belong to this rhythm after all.